The second part of this story ended with Logan finding his girlfriend in the deep woods, and heroically fighting the mercenary who kidnapped her. Eventually the guy managed to defeat him. To sweetly avenge, it was decided not to take his life, but to make it so that he could never walk again. Then Charlie ran to his beloved, took off all the ropes, hugged her, and began to cry. The guy had not been so much worried lately, because he really realized that he could lose the person he was ready to marry even tomorrow. Charlie would do everything he could to make sure that it would never happen again. In the house, despite his serious injury, Jack couldn't calm down, and was about to go to rescue Charlie and his girlfriend. Of course, in such a state it is strictly forbidden to do so, because at the moment Jack is a very easy target, and he can't help him in the fight. He has very prudent colleagues, who simply did not let him make this thoughtless step into the abyss. As suddenly, an ambulance appears on the horizon, from which Emily and Charlie got out. Except for a couple of abrasions, the girl's health is fine. Every morning she needs to apply a certain ointment, and pretty soon everything will be completely gone. As soon as the opportunity arose, Jack immediately ran and kneeled before his master. He blamed himself for not being able to protect Emily, so with a clear heart he let him be beaten and chased away. In return he will say absolutely nothing, because in his opinion he really deserved it. Charlie urged the bodyguard not to blame himself, because he did his best, and that's the most important thing in his job. Only the guy was very interested in how the bandit managed to beat Jack. After all, he himself is a master of martial arts. At that moment Emily broke into the conversation. She said that there were two kidnappers. One of them was wearing a black robe with a hood on his head, so she didn't remember exactly what he looked like. Jack added that the bandit had a centipede on his wrist, which bit him, after which he was paralyzed and couldn't fight anymore. If it wasn't for her, they wouldn't have had a chance of success. So far, from this brief description, Charlie assumed it was the Xianming clan, wondering what motive they had for such a drastic act. After a moment's thought, he notified his guards that he had to leave on an urgent business trip. Of course Jack would like to go with him, but he can't do that yet, because someone has to be responsible for guarding the villa, and report immediately if anyone comes. Charlie is determined to find out more about the situation, and as soon as he finds out something, he'll tell him. Right before the guy was about to get into the car, Emily came to him and told him that there was definitely someone in the bushes. He was skeptical, but he decided to check it out, and since the time was very dangerous, he decided to take James as his assistant, so that in case of emergency the guys could cover each other. Emily was right, and when the boys went to check the bushes, they found William there. Well, it's been a long time. The guys didn't hesitate to trim his hair, tie him up, and make him tell the truth immediately. Since the guy was captured and now his life is in someone else's hands, it didn't take him long to start telling everything he knows. It all started last Wednesday or so. Since the mercenary had failed to take Charlie's life, William's father was very angry and contacted some bad people. These guys looked very creepy. During the conversation they cast a spell on his father and buried him. And now they're threatening William. Their main condition is Charlie's body. In case this crying boy brings it to them, then they will give him life, but there are absolutely no guarantees. William came here only because he was forced to, and asked for help. In fact, he has long wanted to stop crossing paths with Charlie completely, because he realized that he cannot pull. Of course, the guys listened to the information, but hardly anyone was going to help him. James suggested to leave everything as it was, because they didn't need William anymore. Charlie was of a different opinion. He wanted to get answers to his questions, at least to find out why the enemies needed it, and why they wouldn't do it themselves if they were so powerful. When suddenly something flew between the boys at high speed, probably the same creepy guys William was talking about. Charlie immediately ordered James to stay here and take care of the prisoner, and if anything happened, to let him know immediately so that he could be kept informed of the latest developments. By the way, as it turned out, William wasn't completely clean either. Right now you can see a magic spider coming out of his mouth. This is actually too bad, because the enemies could completely hear their conversation. Meanwhile, Charlie is already moving at full speed in the approximate direction where the enemy could fly away. So far, the guy doesn't even realize if he will be able to follow the trail, because it's like looking for a needle in a lot of snow. At one point, he did manage to get a glimpse of his target, for he was a master of his craft, and even more so when it came to his family. Charlie did not lose the opportunity to attack. By the way, the enemy with the girl on his shoulder was running away in an unknown direction. He could not even think that someone was running after him. This naive joy lasted exactly until the man noticed Charlie, who was approaching rather swiftly. The smile on his face disappeared abruptly. Now they were expressing completely different emotions, and they clearly had nothing to do with positive ones. On the background of a strong panic, the opponent began to make every effort to run as fast as possible. But as you can already guess, this speed was clearly not enough, because in this respect Charlie surpassed him several times. A huge yellow hand practically caught up with the opponent. But unfortunately, not everything is so simple. To somehow protect himself, and to prolong his existence on this planet, the man also began to use magic. He used a skill that in theory allows the almighty forces to take over his body completely, in simpler words, teleport. The man even managed to relax a little. For some reason he was 100% sure that it would definitely save his life. Charlie in turn basically expected that the opponent would use some tricks, so he prepared in advance. He took out another dragon ticket, and used the skill of the 9 thunderclaps of the sacred celestials, which allowed a completely random lightning strike directly at the enemy target. Since the rival was no longer functioning, he could no longer hold the guy's ex-wife on his shoulders, so she began to fall downwards without a creature. Charlie, of course, did not hesitate, and caught her at the very last moment, even though he could not have done so, for all the pain and humiliation the girl had brought into his life. Well, since the task was accomplished, the guy decided to go home immediately, because frankly he was a bit tired. As practice shows, even with his level, to fight for a whole night is very problematic. Such an activity requires a lot of energy and internal magical power. It turns out there is still room to strive, and this is not the limit. When Charlie reached his house, he asked someone to pick up the girl, for he had no strength to carry her. But for some reason there was absolute silence in response. No one would even say a word. To put it mildly, it looked rather strange, and it was bad timing. If something really happened there, it would be very difficult for the guy to defend himself. Right in the middle of the street, bodyguard Jack and the rest of the guards were lying on the floor. It was like someone had just beaten them up really badly, and they were doing it without any regret, because at first glance the guys didn't even show any signs of life. Then Charlie remembered his beloved. He just couldn't afford to let anything happen to her a second time. To see that everything was normal, the guy just jumped out of his seat and ran into the house. Of course, he enters the house without knocking, and immediately starts shouting her name, because he was sure that she was not alone in the house. But it turned out all much calmer than one could imagine. The girl just lay alone on the bed and already saw the 10th dream, and the guy simply woke her up. At least she was glad that her husband-to-be had come home, but she didn't understand why he was being so loud. When Charlie realized that everything was plus or minus calm, he threw his ex-wife on the floor and walked over to Emily. The first thing he did was to hug her tightly, and show her how much he cared for her, and then he told her that for some reason all the guards were lying on the floor at the entrance to the house. Emily immediately realized that her future husband was pretty tired, and urgently needed a good rest. She hugged him even tighter in response, and then gently put him to bed. The next morning Charlie woke up alone, and immediately smelled a very pleasant aroma. Emily had been in the kitchen since morning, preparing a delicious breakfast for her lover, so that when he woke up he would have a good meal and energy for the day. She was surprised that he woke up so early, because he usually slept much longer, especially after he was tired. He couldn't sleep well, because he had so many thoughts that kept him awake so early. Since this breakfast was to be served as a surprise, the girl sincerely didn't want Charlie to see what she was cooking, but since he's a very curious guy, he decided to see what was in the pots without further ado. As it turned out, It was noodles, but Emily's lack of cooking experience made it look more like porridge. The girl already realized that it wasn't a good idea to feed her young man like that, so she was going to throw everything away. But since the best man in the world was in a relationship with her, she didn't have to throw anything away. Charlie silently took the plate in his hands, put the food in it, and said that it suited him perfectly, and he was happy to have breakfast. While eating, Emily realized that the noodles were too sweet. She must have mixed up salt and sugar again, and frankly she couldn't understand how Charlie hadn't said anything yet and kept eating. Afterwards the girl said out loud that it looked really awful and she didn't have to eat it at all. Even so, the boy smiled and continued eating. Suddenly, the TV news began to report that there was a fire in the house of a famous businessman, which resulted in the deaths of 2 people, and the whereabouts of the gentleman himself and his son are unknown. In addition, the businessman Yang was found dead in his home that same night, and the police have opened a criminal investigation into the matter. According to reliable reports, the 2 gentlemen were very close, which may have something to do with the tragedy. Initially, Emily thought it was her boyfriend's doing, but he replied clearly that he had nothing to do with it at all. Then I wondered who could have done it, and for what purpose. To be honest, Charlie had no idea who did it. But one thing he knew for sure, the purpose of these 2 was the same. It was revenge for the guy. That's why they kidnapped Emily and beat up Jack. Most likely it was just the beginning, and definitely should expect a second attempt. Even if Yang was really killed for not following the orders of the master, then where the other businessman disappeared, there must be someone behind this case, and we must find out at any cost what is the purpose of the person who started it all, and conspired such serious people. But if Emily is also the target of these people, then why didn't they do anything to her the night they killed all the guards? The girl then assumed that these people were trying to get to her grandfather, but Charlie was quick to disprove that theory, because in fact, at this point, the grandfather is the easiest target, and capturing him is not a problem. When the guy's ex-wife suddenly spoke up, the guys thought she had left a long time ago, but as it turned out she hadn't. Because the moment they were taken hostage, just when the old man saw his sister, things started to get out of hand. For some reason, he called her body a real treasure, though in fact she was just an ordinary girl, with not the most decent habits, and her hobby was spending other people's money. Jan and his father made a deal with this demon, but the naked eye could see that this deal was just empty words, because the grandfather, in case he did not like something, could easily attack, using his centipede. At least he didn't like the fact that they wanted to rush him, because only someone who doesn't realize the importance of the case would rush in this situation. After the father was already unconscious, Grandpa switched to his son, and suggested that he return to the original plan, namely to pick up the phone, call Charlie, and arrange a meeting. After the man made the call, Grandfather couldn't help himself, and just like the father, he destroyed the son. According to the original plan, after successfully completing the task, this man was supposed to leave the city, but since things didn't go exactly according to plan, it led to the current situation. I wonder why the news reported that only the father was killed and the son survived. In general, the situation is getting more and more confusing. We can only speculate what may be next. To be honest, the ex-wife Anna doesn't even know what to do, because she has nothing left. Her husband lost his life, her sister was kidnapped, and Anna in turn hurt the only person who could help her. She does not expect Charlie to help her save her sister, but at least hope that she will help her to build a memorial for her entire family, which was destroyed just recently. In spite of everything, Charlie said that he would try to help, but his ex-wife's sister will not be his main goal. At least he has someone to risk his life for. In the process of saving those whom the guy planned himself, he will try to save his sister. After these words, Anna started crying even harder. She just could not hold back her emotions and was insanely grateful, even for the fact that the guy will just try. When suddenly some unknown man bursts into the house, instead of at least saying hello, he expressed his dissatisfaction with the architecture of the house, because such a simple renovation, this is not the level of the Su family. Charlie, of course, was very angry at the unwanted guest, and wondered who was standing in front of him. It turned out to be Emily's own brother, and it was normal for him to come into a stranger's house, express his displeasure, and say that even if he had no money at all, he would never live in a doghouse like this. Charlie was surprised, to say the least, because he'd never heard of this brother before. But it's not surprising, because the girl broke off contact with him as soon as she left the capital, and basically never contacted him again. By the way, his name is Tony. Now the girl is at least very curious as to why he's here and what the purpose of his visit is. In general, from an old friend, for Tony received information that the grandfather took something very important for their family. Now the guy is very interested to know where this thing is. After all, he strongly wants to take it back. In response to this, Emily said that she knows nothing about it, and in general, the brother should leave, because at least he is not welcome here. This response was not surprising, because it is unlikely that the sister has ever had access to such valuable things. To put it mildly, for the girl it all begins to annoy. To somehow remedy the situation, she began to threaten that she will call the police, and write a statement for trespassing on private property. As much as her brother was not the most ordinary person, it's hard to scare him like that. After all, probably not a single policeman of this city will not dare to put handcuffs on Tony, because then he will only be worse. A large number of connections and good authority, a great force, which is often above all laws, of course. All this is wrong and should not be so, but unfortunately the world is so arranged, and in another way is unlikely to ever be. And if he doesn't, he can't take care of himself, and could do something very bad, so it's best not to test his nerve, but to do as he asks. And when it came to touching him, Charlie stepped in and showed this upstart that he'd already overstepped his authority. To put it mildly, Tony was shocked, because no one on this planet would allow himself to be treated like that, let alone forbidden. Of course, he was very curious about the mystery man. Charlie introduced himself at once, but so far it doesn't say much, because Tony had never heard anything about him before. To get to know each other better, his brother decided to attack Charlie, so that he could fully understand who was standing in front of him. But the point of such an encounter was that if a man had no powers, he would most likely not be able to get up. Of course, like a true professional, the guy responded with magic and repelled the attack. To be honest, Tony couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't even imagine that such a master could be found in such a small town, because even in big cities they could be counted on a few fingers. Charlie realized that his potential rival's skills were quite strong, and his chance of winning was barely over 50%. He doesn't really care what happens to him after the fight, but he's worried about Emily, because the house is pretty crowded and she could really get hurt. So Tony went on the attack. He managed to deflect the first punch without any problems, but he couldn't hit back. In addition to having incredible skills in terms of fighting, he also has a very fast movement speed. Charlie didn't even have time to notice that his opponent went behind his back. Only thanks to his instincts, he realized that he was about to miss a blow in the back. Then the guys started a tight hand-to-hand fight, in which, surprisingly, Tony felt more than well. And in the end, with one deft move, he was able to overpower Charlie, causing him to fall face first to the floor. Of course the girls ran to his aid, but he urged them to stay back, because he wasn't going to end it there. No matter how hard it was, Charlie would never let someone just barge into his house, threaten his girlfriend, and start a fight. Even though Emily knows how strong her boyfriend is, every time she worries about him like the first time, but this time it's not just her. For the first time in her life, his ex-wife also worries about him a lot. The girl even fell to her knees because her blood pressure skyrocketed. When Charlie was finally able to get up, he told the guy to get back down. Even though the fight was over rather quickly, Tony was delighted, and reported with confidence that Charlie's skills were more than enough for this small town. But as it turned out, Emily's brother had met a lot of people of that caliber, and Charlie was no exception. But anyway, since Charlie is in Emily's relationship, all her problems and worries are automatically transferred to him, and if the girl does not want to fulfill them, no one can make her. In fact, only a real man can say those words, and unfortunately, they're in the minority in the world. Then, walking back and forth across the room, Tony told me that he hated people who didn't see their true potential, but continued to live as they were and were happy with everything. After a lengthy expression of his displeasure, the brother offered to make a deal. This is certainly a very interesting point. God only knows what he really needs. In general, people like him are not initially trustworthy. According to Tony's personal observations, Charlie's perfection does not exceed the stage of foundation formation. Of course, the guy did not reveal all the cards, and said that such personal matters did not concern him in any way. In the end, his brother said that he would give Charlie 2 whole years, and if during this time the guy didn't achieve better results, Tony would just come and take his sister away, and then turn Charlie to dust right in front of everyone, without any regret. To be honest, the guy doubted it very much, because in fact his potential is limitless, and depending on the situation he can become much stronger than it seems at first glance. But for the sake of propriety, he decided to ask what would happen if he got lucky, and over the course of 2 years, he could actually get a lot stronger. In that case, the guy will get a chance to fight Tony in the most luxurious arena in the capital, and whether he wins or loses, his name will be known, and at least it will help to build a good career. The terms of the bet were really favorable, and Charlie was happy to agree to them, but on the other hand he had no choice. In that case Tony wouldn't stay long, but he said again that he wanted the thing he'd come for, and the next time Tony came, he'd have to have it. Also, this upstart has not lost the opportunity to remind Charlie that his current strength will not be enough to fight him. That's why he should start to spend much more time on training, only then there will be a result. Well, about this he can certainly not doubt. The guy is very responsible, and will make every effort to make himself at least several times in these 2 years. Finally the man went to the exit, put on his hat, and politely said goodbye, then got into his fancy car and went about his business. At that moment Charlie had a lot on his mind, at least he was trying to figure out who he had just spoken to. This man must be a big shot in the capital, and if you consider Charlie's connections and resources, he's not even fit to be a janitor. Then Emily came up to the guy and told him that Grandpa had actually told her something before he left. Namely, that if the guys in the future encountered a situation they could handle, they should definitely contact the man from the provincial security office. In the past, this man was Mr. Sun's apprentice, so he's bound to help. It was a really good idea, but Charlie wondered why Emily had a look on her face like it wasn't such a good idea. There's an explanation for that too. The thing is that in modern society a man rarely manages to rise to the top on his own. Because of this he always has to depend on someone. Once this guy was supported by his grandfather, and Tony, but now that everyone knows that Charlie is in a quarrel with Tony, it will be quite problematic to ask him for help. But even so the guy did not lose enthusiasm. In principle he was ready to do his studies on his own. Then the guys heard someone knocking on the front door. First they thought it was Emily's brother coming back, but as it turned out later it wasn't. Now they've got people from the security department coming in to tell them that Mr. Fan would like to invite them to a banquet he's personally hosting. It's not the kind of thing you just invite anyone to, so Charlie decided to inquire at once. Unfortunately, these guys are only responsible for sending the message, so they urged not to refuse the invitation. In this case, the guys asked for literally 5 minutes of time to at least minimally prepare, change clothes and go down to the exit. When the guys have already arrived at the party, they immediately realize that the owner is doing very well. At least Emily managed to notice a lot of famous people, and that says only one thing: the man is really successful. The higher the status of a person, the more work you have to do to keep, so organizing such events is a pretty good solution. Amelia also informed her young man that there were quite a few pairs of eyes watching him now. So even if Mr. Fan did not like it, he could not do anything, so it is necessary to completely relax and enjoy this beautiful evening. Suddenly, someone called out to the girl. It was one of the youngest guests of the evening, the one and only daughter of Mr. Fan, named Julia. For some reason, she was overjoyed to see Emily, and immediately rushed to hug her. The little girl had the feeling that they hadn't seen each other for ages. Looking at the expression on Emily's face, you might think that she does not like children, but in fact it is not so. The girl just did not recognize Julia, and decided not to play a play, and just asked who approached her. That's when Baby told her who she really was. And she made it sound like it was a shame not to know. Then Julia turned her attention to Charlie. As it turned out, she had heard quite a lot about him, and sincerely wanted to know what is really so special about this guy. It is important for her to know, because Emily must marry a real man, and if Charlie is not such a man, then the little girl will do everything to prevent this marriage from taking place. Julia got so into character that she started talking in front of everyone in the center of the room about how beautiful, tender, and proud Emily was. She then informed her boyfriend that Julia was a child and should not be taken seriously, at the very least, because she might interfere with the marriage. In the end, the little girl, albeit reluctantly, agreed to let them be together, because she realized that Emily really cared about this man. But if she finds out that Charlie hurt her, he'll be waiting for the worst days of his life. Absolutely all nightmare dreams will be realized. Then the little girl remembered she had something she wanted to tell Emily. It's about a friend of the girl's father's that she remembers very well. Just recently Julia heard information that he was going to take revenge for a man with whom Charlie had problems. For some reason, it washed out only a smile on her face. Probably she just did not take this information seriously, and in general, it is difficult to trust small children in such serious matters. The funny thing about this situation is that Grandpa once said that the only person you can count on is Mr. Fan. It's outrageous that apparently he's not really in Charlie's good graces. Suddenly, Mr. Fan himself enters the banquet hall, with a lot of security, just like a high-ranking man should. He himself is the director of the Provincial Security Department, also graduated from the military academy and set the record of physical fitness indicators, which no one has been able to beat so far. Behind comes a guy named Oscar. This is the eternal shadow of Mr. Fan. Julia even from afar noticed that he is clearly happy with something day. Then the little girl asked why Charlie didn't say hello to her father. He had a logical answer to that question. Why would he do that if they didn't even know each other? The guy didn't have to flatter him just because of his status. Meanwhile, Oscar ordered his men to bring Charlie here to say hello to the commander. Mr. Fan stopped him and asked Oscar to bring Charlie here personally. He knew very well that they were not on the best of terms, but nevertheless the commander ordered him to do it quickly and politely. Of course, all the guests were watching the meeting, and at the same time they were discussing what they thought about it. Instead of just asking, Oscar decided to ask the same question Julia had just asked. In principle, his answer didn't change in any way. Why he had to do that? This answer just instantly pissed the guy off, and he started calling Charlie a jerk in front of everyone, and telling him something about manners, though he was probably hearing about them for the first time. At the same moment, Emily stood up for her young man. After all, to call a person a jerk in public, it has absolutely nothing to do with manners. And in general, how can Oscar allow himself to behave like this, provided that Mr. Fan personally invited Charlie to the event? Of course, Oscar apologized for his act, after which Emily asked him once again to normally address her young man as a real guest. Deep down, the guy just tore apart. At the moment, he can barely cope with the anger that he has inside. As it turns out, this officer's main goal is to get rich and do his best to destroy Emily in the future. After Oscar had concentrated as much as possible, he found the strength to politely address Charlie, namely to tell him that Mr. Fan had asked him to come over. To Oscar, the guy looked like a peacock who was always trying to make himself look good. He also thinks that Charlie is taking advantage of the fact that he is under the protection of the Su family and no one will touch him. But it won't be like that forever, because time is constantly changing and no one can say for sure what will happen tomorrow. In the meantime, Charlie finally reached Mr. Fan, thanked him for the invitation, and asked him why he was invited. The gentleman laughed and said that there was no reason as such, he just wanted to meet such a promising young man. Charlie had really become quite successful lately, and so much so that this information had reached Mr. Fan personally. The moment when Charlie caught the guy who caused real problems for the whole department is considered the most vivid. Then Mr. Fan took his interlocutor by the hand and said that he would like to invite him to become an instructor in his department. When suddenly Oscar bursts in the middle of the conversation, he's furious, to put it mildly, that some savage who came out of nowhere has been entrusted with such a position, and whether he has the qualifications to succeed in this position. Unfortunately, it was easier for Charlie to turn down the job, but it was definitely not for lack of qualifications. Oscar urged him to transplant the bullshit, and informed the entire room if Charlie could overpower him, then the officer would truly recognize his candidacy. In which case the guy took a counter-question. Given Oscar's position, he completely randomly, I think, in jail for assaulting an off-duty officer. Oscar answered immediately that in 5 days, when they will go to the ring, he will sign a waiver of all claims, and in case Charlie wins, he will be allowed to take the position without any problems. The guy told him for the second time that he wasn't interested in working in security already, so he offered to pick another bet. Well, then Oscar offered another option. In case he lost in a fair one-on-one fight, he would publicly apologize to Charlie and treat him like an older brother. In principle, the guy was more than satisfied with these conditions, and he gladly agreed to them. And when Oscar asked what Charlie would do if he lost, the guy just took a glass of sparkling wine in his hands and drank it in a gulp, because he was sure that he would never lose, and there was no point in discussing such a question, because in exactly 5 days Oscar's life would no longer be the same. In principle, Oscar was not frightened by such strong self-confidence of his opponent. He is primarily determined to take revenge, and he has absolutely no time to think about what he can really play. This whole situation pretty much amused Mr. Fan. Young people are so ambitious. But the most important thing is not to forget about safety. By the way, Oscar is one of the 3 best fighters in the department. He was able to reach level 10 by the age of 25, which is considered a very serious result. Level 10, this means that the man is at the stage of building a foundation. He is a master who is not afraid of heaven or earth. Fan was very curious to know if the guy had enough strength to fight a fighter of this level. Charlie said confidently that he had enough skills, because they had improved a lot recently. The only disadvantage was the lack of physical strength, but 5 days would be enough time to make up for it. After these words, Mr. Fan confessed that he liked Charlie even more now, and that he had a communion and a future waiting for him very soon. Julia then remarked that the guy must be happy, since her father really liked him. Also at that moment one of the workers told her some rather sad news. In general, for some reason they were unable to get a ticket to the concert that the girl had asked for so much. Of course, she could not just leave it like that and attack the bodyguard. Since it was the girl's favorite performer, she was much more offended than usual. By chance, Charlie heard what they were fighting about and said that he could help them get tickets to the concert. Julia wondered how the guy was going to turn it around, because he wasn't even from their province. At the same moment a brilliant idea comes into her head. Charlie is probably just secretly dating this singer, and that's why he can get tickets. To be honest, the guy didn't expect such a setup. You'd think you just want to help a man, and he'd bury you in the middle of nowhere. Charlie immediately raised his hands up and said that it was not so, that they had only business relations and nothing more. Even Emily was interested in this answer. She wanted to know what the phrase, strictly business, meant. Well, to put it mildly, the man is stumped. He needs to come up with something fast. In a matter of seconds, Emily came right up to him, and immediately asked a second question about how Charlie met the singer. Well, he's totally screwed, plus Julia's also pushing and giving in. Since the guy was being squeezed from all sides, it was urgent to get started. In the end he told about everything that happened then, from the contract with the sisters to the use of techniques to cure the singer's grandfather. Based on this story, Emily realized that Forever Charlie was perfect for meeting all sorts of beautiful girls. But as a minimum it wasn't really a dating, but only a struggle for the opportunity to get a plant. In the meantime, Julia began to admire the guy even more, and now she was sure that the man in front of her was not a cheater, but a real man, who could even get her tickets to the concert she wanted to attend. In that case, Charlie suggested that she not waste a minute and write to her right away. Before that happens, the little girl asks to hear her. No matter how powerful Charlie is, he shouldn't let himself put sadness in Emily's head anyway, so the best solution is to call the singer and invite her here, that all together to discuss the matter. Charlie decided not to argue with her, and immediately agreed to these conditions, although he did not really see the need to ask the girl to come in person. After quite a long period of time, the singer finally got to Mr. Fan's house. Honestly speaking, Charlie thought that she would not come, and began to worry a lot. But when Grace knocked on the front door, the guy was really relieved. As usual, she was completely disguised, so that the fans wouldn't follow her, because with such a level of popularity as she had, it's basically contraindicated to go out alone. The girls, to put it mildly, were also a little bit waiting and very tired. The reason it took Grace so long to arrive was rather trivial. For some reason, finding the place had been difficult for her, and the security was strict, so she had to stand at the door for a long time. Even her famous face didn't help, so she assumed that the owner of the house wasn't the last person in the world. After hearing her name, Grace hesitated and then realized that one of the members of her fan club was standing in front of her right now. She also said that she reads all Julia's letters and thanked her for her warm and sincere support. The little girl was very pleased to hear such words, because for %90 she was sure that the singer does not even read her messages, but as it turned out, she even remembers her. On the background of this pleasant news, the girl even began to go tears of happiness, because she really likes this singer, and wishes her only the best. Grace was just as pleased to know that she had such loyal fans. It was an honor to meet at least one of them. Then her gaze fell on Emily, her stern look making it clear that she didn't want Grace to stay here too long, much less spend too much time with Charlie. Looking at all this from the outside, the guy immediately realized that they are unlikely to be friends, and in advance began to ask the Almighty to help him in this awkward situation. In general, the singer came here under a certain pretext, namely to get medicine for further treatment of his grandfather. In order not to seem indifferent to her, the guy decided to behave rather rudely, and asked her to leave, because their relationship was purely business, and it made absolutely no sense for them to stay for a long time. To be honest, such indifference really upset the girl. Can't she really sit down for a minute? At least to make this meeting happen, the singer postponed the date of her personal concert, and the guy didn't even appreciate it. Since the girl really came here because of the medicine, the postponement of the concert date is not a valid argument for the guy. Since he had already handed over the medicine, all Grace had to do was pay for it and leave as soon as possible, because this humble dwelling wouldn't be able to accommodate a guest as important as her. That answer really made her think, surely there must be some good reason for his indifference. Then the singer turned her attention to Emily. Finally she saw for the first time the girl Charlie talks about so often, and she's a real beauty. But she didn't think that was a barrier, because Grace had talent and strength, and such positive qualities could only be seen in units. In her opinion, she thinks she's as good as Emily. As long as it's a frank conversation, there should be frank answers. Charlie said matter-of-factly, Grace is the pinnacle of the world, and in his eyes she's just an ordinary person buying medicine, so don't talk about yourself like you're trying to sell yourself. So she put the ticket on the table and said she had to go and do her own thing. And about the next supply of medicine, the guys decided to talk about it at another meeting. At least the fact that the man had agreed to meet her again had already made the singer melt, and all the anger was gone. Charlie also said that Julia wasn't the only one who wanted to attend her concert, so they needed to get some more tickets. Of course she agreed and said that her assistants would bring them later. In the end the guys said goodbye, but because the meeting wasn't the warmest, Grace slammed the door hard when she left. The first thing she did as soon as she got into the car was to ask her assistants to send Charlie a couple more concert tickets. She couldn't believe that she couldn't charm such a talented guy, and she'd never had any problems with that before. To remedy this situation, the girl decided to go for drastic measures, namely to use a special bottle, which she bought recently. Master said that this small bottle will help her keep her popularity for at least 10 years. Grace was sure she could use it to keep any man she wanted, As it turns out later, this potion has no positive effect on Grace. It was made to effectively spy on Charlie, with the help of this singer. Its creator is the same terrible grandfather who kidnapped Charlie's ex-wife's sister and destroyed Ian along with his father. And now when the time is right, he'll do anything to destroy the guy as well as all those who lost their lives before him. According to his calculations, in 3 days, on the day of Grace's grand concert, Charlie should lose his life. It is still unknown how exactly it will happen, but this old grandfather definitely came up with some cunning plan. In general, after 3 days, the singer finally went on stage and began to sing for her favorite fans. It was really a very large-scale event, gathered a whole soccer stadium of listeners. Julia watched the concert from the VIP box for the first time in her life, and she liked it a lot. Emily, in turn, was also pleasantly surprised, because the view from here was quite good, but the atmosphere was a little different. Since Julia liked everything very much, she made a brilliant conclusion. From now on, she should let Charlie make such calls more often. In general, Grace was very generous, and gave them more than 20 tickets. By the way, to be a VIP guest is really very prestigious. When a person does not have a lot of money in principle, he does not even think about it. But whoever tried this kind of vacation is unlikely to want to buy ordinary tickets. On the way here, nothing bad happened, but for some reason this is the place where the guy gets a strange feeling of panic. Usually if something like that happens, it's not good, but let's hope for the best. By the way, Grace's outfit was just stunning. That white dress fits her perfectly. At that moment, a very emotional song started playing. It looked so beautiful that Julia couldn't hold back her emotions and started crying. Looking at Grace, she realized that this girl was as beautiful as the words of her song. They seemed to merge into one. Then Charlie started to cry without noticing, and at the same time very sad thoughts started to appear in his head, which automatically put him in a depressed state. Charlie's emotional resilience has allowed him to come to his senses, and he's starting to realize that something is definitely wrong. Looking around, he notices that Emily is also crying, and talks out loud about how she envies people who are able to express their feelings through song. There's definitely something wrong with this track. Literally in an instant, a very happy atmosphere turned into a very depressing one. All the people started to sink, and instead of relaxing they thought about their problems. Charlie has to find out who's behind this as soon as possible, because this can't go on much longer. Using his skills, the boy was able to see that Grace had some kind of magical red line connected to her, so now at least he knew exactly where all the negativity was coming from. Then Charlie warned Emily that he'd be leaving the room for a while and asked her to be very careful. Of course, Emily tried to stop him, but not this time, because she had to act, and as soon as possible. When the guy was already downstairs, he lost sight of the red line he had seen earlier. At the same moment, some girl clung to him like a nipple and started touching him wherever she wanted. Since Charlie is a very loyal young man, he immediately did his best to get her off his back. The first time he just threw her in the opposite direction. This woman should stop thinking that she can bewitch him with her charms. Charlie gives her exactly 5 seconds to break the spell and explain to him why she's doing it. To put it mildly, she was surprised, because even Grand Masters cannot resist her charms. Now this thrill-seeker fully realized that the rumors about Charlie, it's really not just a rumor. In the course of the conversation, the guy managed to find out that this girl was sent here by someone to fulfill some bad tasks. He had originally assumed that the elder had sent her, but the girl made it clear that he hadn't. She said she had just decided to practice magic here. She needed human energy for that, and since there were so many people here at the moment, there was no better place to be. Charlie decided not to even listen to this nonsense, and tried to scare the girl by showing her a little bit of his potential. In general, if she told the truth, Charlie might let her live, but if she continued to lie, God only knows what would happen to her next. This girl is a disciple of the Xianming clan. She sold those enchanted perfumes to Grace, under the pretext that they would enhance her popularity, but in fact it's actually a special potion that her clan uses to absorb human energy. It doesn't last long on its own, and only when she's singing, but it's not harmful to the body either. Interesting. So if it's not unhealthy, then why doesn't the girl use it herself? The thing is, she's not really a good singer, so it's definitely not an option for her. Then this girl said that she would show where the elder practiced if the guy would spare her. In principle, it was quite a favorable exchange, so he agreed without hesitation. Such information would definitely not be unnecessary. In general, to find it you need to get to the foot of the mountain Linlan, then standing with your back to the wooden box to go right exactly 12 steps, then another turn to the right and straight 8 steps. At the end Charlie should see in front of him a passage, and the girl at this point will be looking after him mountains. After the guy with accuracy to perfection repeated everything as she said, he really came to the right place. The clan apprentice really hadn't deceived him, or she had, but she was trying to catch him in a trap, and now we would find out. Charlie was moving through the cave with great care, and suddenly the rocks poured out of the cave right behind him. Of course it was hardly like a trap, but it was scary. At the very least the first thing to do is to see if anyone else is here. As if by chance Charlie saw countless pills on the way. At first glance it was just a jackpot, but it is not known what quality they are and how effective they are. It may well be that they are practically useless. Since his interest was piqued, he decided to try a couple right here. Since the elder was taking them, they must be of normal quality. After taking the pills, Charlie felt his energy increase, but it was so low that it was practically useless. It's really too little. You'd have to eat at least 100 of them to level up, maybe even a couple hundred. Then the guy comes up with a brilliant idea. Maybe just eat them all and save someone the trouble. Of course, it's a brilliant idea in itself, to deprive the owner of the pills of the ability to level up. After some time, sitting on the mountain, the girl noticed that for some mystical reason it started to snow outside. Of course, the generator of this New Year's mood was Charlie, because he began to raise himself level by level, and the snow, bringing him to nirvana, became a guide for him to a better life. It was really an incredible idea to start receiving these pills en masse, so long as no one from the enemy clan came here now. During the cultivation, the guy met his dragon. He was surprised to say the least, because they hadn't seen each other for only a couple of days, and his personal progress was quite high. In honor of the big event Dragon, he said he could show the guy how to use a skill called Insane Stroke. In general, this skill is a creation that surpasses any technique invented by humans. A person who possesses it can safely be called virtually invulnerable. When suddenly, right while taking a new skill, the guy heard some strange sounds behind him. Frankly speaking, it pissed him off, because in no way one should be distracted during such a responsible procedure. As it turned out, it was Anna's sister, completely tied up with ropes, and with some rag in her mouth. When the process was completely finished, the guy immediately ran up to her and began to release her. The girl urged him to do it as soon as possible, because the elder was about to come, and if he did, there would be a fight, so the most important thing was to leave the cave in time. In the process of releasing him, while there was time, Charlie inquired about Jack, where he might be, at least roughly. The girl said that the elder had thought him useless, and had sent him somewhere else. In that case the boy promised to get her out, but urged her to stay out of the way, and this was just the perfect opportunity to use the new technique. Without thinking long, Charlie fired a powerful magic shot, after which he managed to break through the thick stone layer of the mountain. It was done in order to leave this place as soon as possible. The flow of energy would only be powerful that at one point this dark night was light as I am with him. Well, in the future with this powerful skill should be careful, and use it only in extreme cases, because such power is quite difficult to control, and quite accidentally you can shake an innocent person. As suddenly in the cave sharply began to crumble rocks, it says only one thing, that this place is about to collapse. You need to leave immediately. At the same moment the elder came into the cave. He didn't understand what the strange tremors were, or why they were happening. Then he saw that someone had eaten all his pills, which he had been collecting for quite some time, and expected to raise his level quite a bit in the future. Somehow the elder just sensed that Charlie had done it, probably because no one else would have done such a desperate act. Meanwhile, the concert was finally over, and Emily was getting worried, because Charlie never just disappears. Julia tried to calm her down by saying that the guy probably just had a tummy ache, that's why he was gone so long. That's a possibility, but Charlie and Emily were having an affair, and her heart told her that something bad had happened. Suddenly a guy walks into the girl's room. Of course, Emily immediately inquired about what happened to him, but since it's a pretty long story to tell, there just wasn't time. He also had his ex-wife's sister on his shoulders, and you could tell she was so visibly unwell. Charlie asked to call an ambulance as soon as possible, or the girl could lose her life. And while the ambulance will go, the guy would like to try to give her a chance to survive with the help of his magical abilities. Then the same night the girl was taken to the local hospital. On the morning she was visited by Anna, who was insanely happy about the fact that her sister is safe and sound, at the moment is next to her. The sisters' reunion is a solution, and hopefully they won't have any more problems and won't have to be rescued. Now the number one priority is to find Jack, who's probably not on the best of terms right now. On their way out, the boys met Grace, who had heard about yesterday's incident and was here to see how Charlie was doing. Of course the guy said it was fine, but even if it was bad, he'd still say it was fine. But it should be noted, the singer arrived just in time. Charlie urged her to show him the bottle of perfume she was currently wearing. As Grace realized that the perfume was not ordinary, she pretended not to know what it was about. In that case, Charlie decided to tell her. If she doesn't want to lose her life, she has to get rid of them, because everything in this world has its price, and you have to think for a moment about the price of success of your career. After hearing the information, she starts crying. The girl confessed that she used them rarely, and if Charlie hadn't broken her heart that day, she wouldn't have touched them. In any case, all these fairy tales are not interesting to the guy, and he once again asked the girl to give him the perfume. Good, this time she agreed without any problems. After the guy took it in his hands, a ghost literally started to come out of the bottle. Under the influence of the strongest magic, he just couldn't be there anymore. Everyone standing around was shocked by what they saw, especially Grace, who couldn't believe she had been carrying around such a horrible object for so long. All this time, the Phantom was giving the girl good luck, but in return he was absorbing her spiritual energy and constantly shortening the years of her life. The whole situation made her wonder how she dared to trust an unknown man, and buy such a supposedly magical fragrance from him. And when the Phantom heard those words, he immediately flew in her direction.